My name is Antonio, and in this video I'm going to show you how to create a REST API using Node, TypeScript and MongoDB. We'll be covering the basics of creating a REST API, including setting up our environment, creating our routes, and handling errors. A lot of people don't know how to do this or where to start, so I'm going to break it down all for you. By the end of this video, you'll be able to create your own APIs that will power your next big project. Alright, so let's get started. First of all, we're going to open a new folder, and inside I'm going to write npm init-y. This is going to set up our project, accepting all the default options. And now we will have a new file here called package.json. Next step is to set up TypeScript. So let's go ahead and let's run npm install -d TypeScript. Along with TypeScript, we are also going to need ts-node. So let's go ahead and install npm install -d ts-node. For running our project, I'm going to use nodemon, which is going to keep our project running during all the changes. So npm install -d nodemon. Perfect. Just like that, we have our initial dependencies. Next thing, we're going to config TypeScript. So create a new file called .tsconfig.json. In tsconfig.json, we are going to open a new object and write compiler options. We're going to set the module to node next. We're going to set the module resolution to node. We're going to set the base URL to source. We're going to set the out directory to dist. We're going to enable source map. And we're going to include no implicit any. This is going to enforce our TypeScript rules by a bit, which is what we want for now. We're also going to add an include option, which is going to be equal to source /*/ another asterisk, which means we are going to include all of the files in the source folder, all the folders inside the source folder, and all the files there as well. Perfect. This is a great configuration. Next thing we are going to configure is nodemon. So open a new file called nodemon.json. Inside nodemon.json, we are going to open an object and say watch. And the folder we want to watch is the same as in TypeScript configuration called source. The extensions for which we are going to look for are .ts and .js. Make sure there is a comma in between. And the execute function is going to be ts_node./source/index.ts. Great. Now let's structure our project just a little bit by creating a new folder called source, and inside create a file called index.ts. Here we're just going to say console log hello TypeScript. So let's go ahead to package.json and let's add a script called start, which is going to be nodemon, just like that. So now go ahead and run npm start. And just like that, we have a working TypeScript saying hello TypeScript. Thanks to nodemon looking for changes, if we change this to hello node, it's going to restart and it's going to be here for us. Great. Next thing we want to do is set up our Express server. So let's start by importing Express from Express, importing HTTP from HTTP, import body parser, cookie parser. Let's import compression. And lastly, let's import course. We are going to need all of this to make sure our project is running correctly. So next, let's initiate our app. So const app is equal to express. Our app is going to use course. So write course like this, credentials, true. This is going to be important because of how we are going to implement our authentication. Next, make sure the app uses compression. Make sure it uses cookie parser because we will be working with cookies. And make sure it uses body parser in the form of JSON. Great. Now we can create our server. Const server is equal to http.createServer. And we're going to pass our newly created app. Before we go forward, let's go ahead and install all of these packages right here. So I'm just for now going to stop what's running in the terminal here. And I'm going to install npm install express body-parser, cookie-parser, compression, and course. Once that is installed, we need to install their types. So go ahead and write npm install -d types express, types body parser, types cookie parser, and types compression, types course. Just like that, our errors are gone. Great. Now let's add a listener to our server. So server.listen. We're going to be running our server on port 8080. So open back a callback and say console log server running on http --localhost 8080. Great. Now, if we try and run our nodeman again, so npm start, you're going to see a new message saying server running on http localhost 8080. If we visit this in our Google Chrome, we're going to get a cannot get route, which means the server is initialized, but we have no routes at the moment. Great. Now let's move on creating a MongoDB database and connecting MongoDB in our project. So for that, we're going to go ahead and we're going to write MongoDB Atlas. Pick the first result and click on sign in. Depending on whether you've done this before, you might have an account, but you can just sign up using Google. It's what I'm going to do for now. Once you've logged in, you're going to see a dashboard similar to this. Go ahead and click Build Database or use the Create button. Make sure you select a shared free database. You don't have to look at all the options here. For now, just click Create Cluster and confirm one more time it's free here and free here. For our database authentication, we are going to need to create an admin. For tutorial purposes, I'm going to use Antonio as username and Antonio as password. I highly recommend you use an auto-generated secure password or use a service like LastPass, 1Password, something like that. Once you've created our user, we want to make sure that we can connect from our local environment. And for that, just click Add my current IP address. Click Finish and close. Click Go to Databases. And you will be able to see your cluster right here. Next, click on Connect and say Connect your application, the second option. Here, we will be provided with some options such as Node.js and our version. We don't have to change that. We can just use this string they've created for us. So let's go back to our code now, and let's create a new constant called const mongo URL. And we're going to paste the string. What we need to change here is this password section. Remember, I used Antonio as username and Antonio as password. So what I have to write here is Antonio, and this is going to be my access. Next we have to do is close this terminal for now and say npm install mongoose. We are also going to need to install npm-d types/mongoose. Go ahead and import mongoose at the top. And right here, we're going to initiate our mongoose. So right, mongoose.promise is going to equal to global JavaScript promise. Mongoose.connect is going to be equal to mongo_URL, which we have created right here. Again, make sure you have username and password set up correctly. And last, we're going to add an error catcher in case something goes wrong. So write the following: mongoose.connection.on error, and write a callback, which is going to accept an error, which is a type of error. And all we're going to do is say console.log error, because that's all we need for now. Perfect. Now, let's go ahead and run our nodemon again. So npm start. As you can see, we get some deprecation warning, but Mongoose is successfully connected. Great. Now it's time to create our first database schema. So inside source, create a new folder called db. Inside db, create a new file called users. Users.ts is going to be our user schema and user model. So go ahead and import mongoose from mongoose. And let's define our user schema. Const user schema is going to be equal to new mongoose.schema. Inside, we're going to have a username, which is a type of string, and it's going to be required. Next, we're going to have email, which is also going to be a type of string, which is also required. We're now going to write the authentication model. So go ahead and write authentication. It's going to be an object which is going to have a password, which is a type of string, which is required, but it is not selected. What select false means is that every time we use one of our controllers to fetch the user, we want to avoid fetching authentication object by accident, meaning we don't want to fetch all users and provide the entire API with our authentication data. Next, we're going to add another field called salt, which is going to be a type of string. And again, it's not going to be selected by default. And we're going to do the same thing for session token. Type string, select, false. Excellent. We have built our first schema. Congratulations. Next, we have to turn this schema into a model. So go ahead and write export const user model, which is equal to mongoose.model. We're going to call the model user, and we're going to use user schema. Perfect. And now we're going to write some actions. These actions are going to be used in controllers. It is a practice to keep them abstracted. For now, I think this file is going to do just fine. So go ahead and write export const get users it is going to be a simple method, which is going to use the user model to run a simple find mongoose method. Next, let's write get user by email. We're going to use this in various authentications, such as registering. So let's see if the exact user exists and stuff like that. So the parameter we're going to accept is email, which is a type of string. And what we're going to do is run user model that find one by email. Perfect. Next, a very important action, get user by session token. We're going to use this to confirm whether our user is logged in or not. So go ahead and write session token as the parameter, which is the type of string. And we're going to say user model find one, very similar. And what we're going to search for is authentication, that session token to be equal to session token. Just like that. Next, we're going to write expert const get user by ID, which is self-explanatory. But for this one, we don't have to use find by one. We can just use find by ID and pass in user ID. Great. And just a couple of more actions left. We're going to write const create user, which is going to accept values. And it's going to say user model, new user model, values that save. And dot then user to object. So we can get it in a digestible form. Two more functions left. Expert const delete user by ID, which is going to be ID string, user model that find one and delete, and we're going to use underscore ID is equal to ID. And the last method we're going to use is going to be called update user by ID. It's going to accept the ID, and it's also going to accept values which are going to be of the same type as create user. So string any. It's going to say user model find by ID and update. And we're just going to say ID and values. And just like that, you've finished the entire user model and user schema. Perfect. Now we're going to move on into creating some helpers for authentication before we move on into routing. So in our source folder, create another folder called helpers, and inside a file called index.ts. Here we're going to use authentication helpers, which are going to help us either to encrypt the password or to create a random token. So import crypto from crypto. And first, let's create the randomizer. So expert const random is going to be a method which is simply going to return crypto dot random bytes 128 that toString base 64. So it's digestible for our database. Next, we're gonna create an authentication util. So expert const authentication. It's gonna accept salt, which is a string, and it's gonna accept password, which is also going to be a string. Make sure it returns a crypto function. Crypto.create_HMAC. We're going to use the algorithm called SHA-256. And we're going to use a combination of salt and password. Join dash. We're going to update that using our secret. We're going to define our secret up here. Const secret is just going to be something unique for your project. In my case, this is going to be Antonio REST API. Just like that. So make sure you update this with secret and then digest into hex. Perfect. We have created all the helpers we need for our authentication module. So let's close things a bit and let's create an authentication route. So before we start, let's create an authentication controller. So create a controllers folder and inside create authentication.ps. First controller we're going to create is going to be the register controller. So import express from express and export const register, which is going to be an asynchronous function, which is going to create a request, which is type of express.request, and the response, which is type of express response. Open up a try and catch block, and let's handle the error side first. For now, we're just gonna make sure we log the error. We're not gonna do anything else with it. And then we're just gonna end the call by saying return response send status 400 because something went wrong. In our try method, we're gonna write an actual registration process. So go ahead and let's extract the data we expect from our body. In our case, that is going to be email, password, and username. If you're wondering why we know this is what we're gonna get, it's because we have defined that in our username and email, just like that, and password. So first, let's create a small check to see if any of these fields are missing. So if we are missing an email, or if we are missing password, or if we are missing username, we want to return response send status 400 because that's not something we can work with. Next, let's check if the email user has entered already exists. So const existing user is going to be equal to await, and then we're going to have to import the function get user by email from --db users, just like that. So let's await get user by email, and let's just send in an email. If existing user exists, we're going to return response send status 400. There is nothing we can do about that. If everything passes and we have email, password, and username, and there is no existing user, we want to create the authentication. So we're going to have, first we're going to need to create salt. And for that, we're going to use our random util. So I'm going to import, and let's import random from helpers and helpers, just like that. Next, let's create our user. Const user is going to be await create user, email, username, and open up an authentication object, which is going to have the newly generated salt and password, which is going to be an util we have created up there called authentication. Authentication, and we're going to say salt and password. Let's not forget to import the create user controller from here. Just like we have get user by email, we need to remember to import create user as well, just like that. After we've done that, we need to return a success message. So return response status 200 to JSON user. Just like that. You have successfully created your first controller. Good job. Now, we're going to focus on creating a route. So, create a new folder called router. In this router, create a file called index.ts. We're going to import express from express, and we're going to say const router express router. Next, we're going to export the default function, export default, which is type of express router. And from now on, all we're going to do is say return router. Just like that. Now, in this router folder, create a new file called authentication.ts. Go ahead and run import express from express. And let's import our register controller. So register from controllers/authentication. Export default a router parameter, which is type of express.router, and write router.post-out-register, and pass in the controller called register. Perfect. Now go back to index in the router, and let's import this newly created authentication route. Import authentication from authentication, just like that. And we're going to pass it into this function right here as authentication router. Before we test this, we have to go back to index.ts and add app.use/router. And make sure we don't forget to import our router from router. Just like that. And now let's test out registration in Postman. I have a predefined route here, HTTP. Make sure it's not HTTPS. It's HTTP localhost 8080/out/register. We have defined that right here, /out/register, and we're going to use the register controller. We're going to write an email of antonio@codes.com, a password of 123, and a username of Antonio. And it's all going to be stored right here. Right now, we have nothing in our database. But if we go ahead and click send, we have successfully created our first user with authentication. And if we check it out, you can see it appears right here. Good job. Now it's time for us to create our login controller. So let's close stuff up. Let's go to controllers, authentication, and let's create our login controller. So export const login is going to be an asynchronous function. It's going to accept express request and the response. Open up a try and catch block. We're going to handle errors the same way. So console log. And return response send status 400. Just like that. We're going to export the fields we will expect, which in our case is email and password, from request.body. If there is no email or if there is no password, we're going to return response send status 400. Next thing we need is to check whether there is a user with this email. So go ahead and write const user is going to be await get user by email. Write in email. If there isn't a user, there is nothing we can log into. So return response send status 400. Next, we're going to learn how to authenticate our user without knowing their password. We're going to use that using hash comparison. So const expected hash is going to be equal to authentication user.authentication.salt and password. And then we're going to say if user.authentication.password is not equal to expected hash, we're going to return response send status 403. Before we can continue doing this, we need to add another function here called .select. Open up a string and say plus authentication.salt space plus authentication.password. This is very important. Very important to have this. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to access authentication and salt, right? So check if user authentication password is equal to expected hash we have created using newly typed in password. If it's not, we are going to send a 403 response. If it is, we're going to update user session token. So go ahead and write const salt is equal to random and user.authentication, the session token is equal to authentication salt user underscore ID to string. Await user save. And now we have to set the cookie. Make sure you write response that cookie. My cookie name is going to be Antonio-out. And we're going to save the session token, user authentication session token. And we're going to write a cookie option called the main localhost and a path /. What we want to do now is say return response status 100.json user. Just like that, we have created our login controller. Now we're going to go ahead and go into our router authentication, and we're going to add router.post out login, and we're going to use login controller, which we will import from here as well. If we go to Postman now and try to log in using Antonio at codes with the password of 1 to 3 as we set, we have successfully logged in. But if I try 1, 2, 3, 4, for example, I'm going to get forbidden. Nice. And once I'm successfully logged in, you will also see the cookie, which is my session token. Perfect. Now we're going to focus on creating our users' routes. So we're going to start by creating a folder called Middelwares. In this Middelwares, we're going to create 2 middlewares. Import express from express. And we're also going to import another package. So open your terminal. And now I'm just going to stop this and say npm install Lodash. Also write in npm install d types/Lodash. Don't forget to start your project again. So npm start. Make sure your project is running and Node1 welcomes you with a message just like that. I'm going to close this for now, but keep it running. I'm going to import get and merge from Lodash, which we're going to need later. We're also going to need a method called getUser by session token from .db users. So the first middleware we're going to create is authenticated middleware. So expert const is authenticated. It's going to be a synchronous function which accepts request, which is type of express.request, and response, which is type of express response. We're going to open up a try and catch block, very similar to our controllers. And in here, what you want to do is just write console log error and return response send status 400, as we've done many times before. So first things first, we want to extract the cookie. Const session token is going to be request cookies. And we're going to pick Antonio-out. Why this cookie? Well, we have set it in our controller's authentication. Response.cookie Antonio-out in our login controller. Let's go back into our middlewares. First things first, if there is no session token, let's return response send status 400, as there's nothing we can do about that. Sorry, 403 would be a better choice. Next, we're gonna see if there even is an existing user by this session token. So go ahead and say const existing user await get user by session token. If there isn't an existing user, return response send status 403 as well, because we are not authenticated to do this. Next, we're going to do a useful merge to our request object. Merge request identity existing user. Just like that. And return next. We have forgot to add next in our parameters. So after response, just write next, which is type of express next function. Just like that. We have created our first middleware, and we're going to use it in a moment. For now, go ahead and create users.ts controller. Inside of users controller, first we're going to create a get all users controller. So import express from express, import get users from db users, const get users is going to be an asynchronous function which is going to accept the request, which is express.request, and the response, which is express.response. We're going to open up a try and catch block as we did before, and we are going to return console log the error, and we're going to say return response send status 400. Here, we're going to say, I have a very simple function called users. It's going to be await get users. And we're going to say return response status 200.json users. Just like that. Now let's go ahead and go back into our router, and let's create a new router called users.ts. Import express from express, and let's import get all users from -- controllers users. Expert default router, which is type of express router, and just write router get / users and write get all users. Just like that. Don't forget, we have to go back into our router index. We have to import our users, and we have to add them here. Just like that. Now if we go into Postman and go into users get function, we are going to get the users object. And if we're going to register and create another one, another user, and then try get again, we're going to see this new user. Now we want to do something. We want to remove our authentication cookie. Right now we can see the users even if we are not authenticated. We want to change that. So we're going to go back into router, users, and we're going to import is authenticated from ... middlewares. And we're going to add this after our route is authenticated, comma, get all users. If we try again, we're going to get a forbidden. But if we log in and try again, we can successfully see all of our users. Good job. Now we're going to go ahead and focus on creating the delete and update for our users. So go back into users and say export const delete user. It's going to be an asynchronous function which accepts request. And the response open up a try and catch block, log the error, and return status. Perfect. Instead of our body, for the first time, we're going to accept parameters. So extract the ID from requested params. Request from params. Now, we are not going to check any authentication here because we're going to use a middleware for that. So go ahead and say const deleted user is going to be await delete user by ID. Make sure you import this ID and send in ID. Return response JSON deleted user. Just like that, we have created a controller to delete users. So copy delete user controller. Let's go back to our router and let's write router.delete users -id delete user, which is going to be imported in here. If we try and delete food, for example, we're going to copy the ID, we're going to click delete, we're going to change this, click send. We have successfully deleted foo. And if we try again, you can see that foo no longer appears here. But this is a mistake because we should not be able to delete another user. So let's go ahead and create another middleware. This middleware is going to be called isOwner. Open up a try catch block. And inside, we're going to check for parameters as well, because this is where we're going to use it. Bracket params. We're going to say const current user ID is going to be equal to get request identity ID as string. We have to fool TypeScript a little bit with this request identity because of this authenticated middleware where we merge request identity, but we don't tell TypeScript that that's where we merged it. So that's why we have to tell it that it's going to be here as a string. If there isn't current user ID, we're going to return response send status 400. Actually 403. Next, we're going to say if current user string isn't equal to ID, we're going to return response send status 43. And then we're going to say next. Just like that. Now let's go back and let's go into users authentication. Let's import our isOwner middleware and let's write it right here before delete user. Let's go into register and let's create foo again. Let's fetch all the users and let's try and remove foo, even though we're logged in as Antonio. So one more time, I'm going to fetch foo's ID and I'm going to try and delete foo. Now I'm going to get a forbidden. But if I go to login and log in as foo and try to delete myself, then we forgot to put is authenticated right here. So make sure it is authenticated. Make sure is authenticated is first. Make sure is authenticated is first. So is authenticated right here. And let's try again. And just like that, we have successfully removed foo. And if we try again, we cannot see because we removed ourselves. But if we log in as Antonio and try again, we can see that foo no longer exists. Great. We're moving on and creating our last controller, which is going to be the update controller. So go ahead and write export const update user. It's going to be a asynchronous function. It's going to accept request, express, request, response, express, response. Open the try and catch block. Arrow. Log the error just for local. Just like that. And here we're going to extract the only thing I want us to update for now, which is going to be the username. And I'm going to extract that from requested body. So if there is no username, I'm going to return send status 400 because it's not something we can work with. Next, we're going to see if the existing user exists. So we're also going to have an ID request params right here. Don't forget to add that. And just say const user await get user by ID and say user that username user and await user save. Return rest status 200 the JSON user.end. Just like that. Now let's go back into our router users and let's write router.patch users user ID is authenticated is owner update user. Just like that. Now let's check if we can update Antonio's username. So my current username is Antonio. I'm gonna update this. And there we go, modified Antonio. Now let's just try and create a new user here, foo. Let's see if we can change foo's name. And we get forbidden. Good job.
Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed, leave a like, comment, and subscribe. See you in the next one.